And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
Indeed it is. Today is Friday. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Greta. Not. Anyway, we are here live with Climate Change Roundtable. I am Anthony Watts, and I am your host this week, filling in for Andy Singer, who normally holds this position. Today we have with us 2 people that you're probably familiar with if you've watched the show before, and that is Sterling Burnett and Linnea Lueken. And both of them are going to be talking along with me about the futility of electric cars. You know, the electric cars seem to be gaining a lot of popularity in advertising these days. I mean, just look at the Super Bowl. Every advertisement for the Super Bowl last year had an electric car in it, and they are all over the place. There's pre-orders going out and all sorts of things happening related to pushing the electric car. But I want to give full disclosure before we talk about this. I have owned in my lifetime 3 electric cars. I don't own them anymore. Here's the one that the most recent one I had. This one came from China, and it was a company called Greenwheel. And I had actually set up the beginning of a dealership in California to sell these because I was fascinated by the technology. Now, this particular model here used a lead acid battery as opposed to the lithium batteries, which power the modern ones. But interesting thing, even though I had imported vehicles and done all of the handiwork to get these things set up and ready to go, I was thwarted from selling them by California government. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I got out of California. But I got to tell you, the paperwork and essentially the blackmail associated with the California government were insane. What happened was in 2006, when I started ordering these, I ordered 4 of them to start with. Then while they were on the boat coming over from China in containers, the Global Warming Solutions Act, AB 32, was passed in California. By the time they landed, there was a new requirement that said you have to get all vehicles, no matter what fuel they're using, inspected to produce a global warming rating. And you had to produce this crazy sticker that you put on the side of the vehicle in order to be able to sell it, to give it a global warming rating. Now, they couldn't just simply do something simple like have some inspector look under the hood and go, oh, yeah, it's electric, no emissions. No. California, in their infinite wisdom, made you go through dynamometer tests, emission sniffing tests, all that crap in order to sell an electric vehicle. And then they wanted $30,000 to do this test, and there was only one facility within reach of me down in Los Angeles, 600 miles away. Anyway, bottom line is that California killed my electric vehicle business because of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I drove this thing for a few years, and it eventually died. And of course, I couldn't get any parts for it. And that was the end of that. But yeah, I will not own another electric vehicle at this point because of that and other things. But we're going to talk about the modern electric vehicles today. And one of the things I want to show you real quick is this chart about energy density. You know, here's the interesting thing. At the very top is the lithium battery in terms of energy density in megajoules per kilogram. Lithium batteries are the absolute lowest form of energy density of all the available fuels. Even wood does better. A Stanley steamer would do better than a lithium battery in terms of, compact energy resources. And interestingly enough, hydrogen is way up there at the top. So, we're going to talk about this, the fuel, the applications, and so forth, and just basically put a skewer in the whole idea of electric vehicles. Now, we had another, the impetus for this particular discussion came from a post that was done by Willis Etchenbach, one of my friends and one of my regular contributors on whatsuppwiththat.com. And he produced a really great essay about the electric vehicles, and he called it the mirage of electric vehicles. Basically, he pointed out some really interesting things that, Jim, if you have that URL up, I'd certainly appreciate bringing up that webpage. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Linnea and see what you have to say about electric vehicles. You've had some experience with energy density. What do you think? You're muted.
Sorry about that. The chart says it all. I mean, the battery issue in particular is one that I think is a little bit hard for people to really wrap their head around. So you get an electric car, and the first thing that people who have to replace the battery on their electric car find out is that it's nothing like replacing the battery in a normal car. The electric car battery tends to be like the entire undercarriage of the vehicle. It's crazy. I've only recently actually seen what that looks like. And I had been assuming that it was quite a bit of a smaller battery pack. And it's unbelievable. And these lead acid batteries in particular that you're talking about, well, if you're concerned about the environment, the construction and the manufacturing of the lead acid batteries in China and India, there's a couple of studies that have come out that have shown that it's actually leading to some pretty severe lead leakage into the environment and into potable water sources. Yeah. So there's a lot of questions. And of course, any industrial operation is going to come with some degree of risk, depending on the location, some more than others. Places like China don't seem to care very much at all about that kind of leakage. So it's going to be a lot worse coming from them than if the United States were manufacturing these things. But there are a lot more questions that need to be answered in regards to the environmental friendliness of an electric vehicle than we're led to believe. You know, when people's only concern is carbon dioxide, they overlook a whole lot of other issues.
They sure do. They sure do. Let's go back to that webpage real quick before we get to you, Sterling, because I want to point out something to people. Jim, if you'll scroll down just a little bit. Jim Lakely, our producer, is working in the background for me today. If you'll scroll down a little bit, the analysis that Willis did basically found that over the past 10 years, the amount of gasoline that was saved by electric vehicles, even though they're growing exponentially, came down to 2 days worth of gasoline compared to the whole U.S. consumption. That's what we've gotten out of electric vehicles over the past decade. It's just, it's futile. I mean, there's no impact of any significance towards reducing CO2. Sterling, what do you got to say?
Yeah, billions in subsidies, 2 days worth of gas saved. Probably less of an impact on gasoline consumption than even ethanol. And ethanol has almost no impact on gasoline consumption. You know, there are you talked about full disclosure. I've seen some comments where someone said they had an electric vehicle. My mom has a hybrid vehicle, and she has for a few years. The warranty's out. Her battery pack goes out. The battery pack costs more than the car's value. Yep. If it were a normal internal combustion engine, she could replace the battery and the transmission for less than the battery pack. Mm-hmm. And it would not be more than the car's value. And now that's for a hybrid. Can you imagine how much more expensive it is for a full electric? The battery packs there are much larger. They're much heavier. And by the way, you know, your shade tree mechanic can't replace those things. You have to go to specialized dealers. It turns out she took hers to Firestone. They said, we can't do this. You need to take it back to the dealer. Concerning your electric car, that wouldn't even be allowed in the United States to be sold today, Anthony. Leave California's particular idiocies aside. Under the Biden administration's plan for electric vehicles, it has to be largely made in the U.S. The component parts have to come from the U.S. They have to be built using union labor. that pays prevailing wages, that wouldn't work. So, you know, this is both a subsidized jobs program and no good for the environment. Terrible for laborers in the countries. You know, basically, someone wrote this week, it's electric vehicles are the blood diamonds of the modern age because of the slavery, because of the forced labor, the child labor that's used to get the materials that go not into the lead, not into the lead, but into the lithium ion, which are the most common batteries for these things. And then, leaving all that aside, the damage it's doing to our electric grid and the damage it does to your homes if it happens to catch fire while it's just sitting there, folks. You know, one country after another, one state after another have pulled public electric vehicles off the roads when they caught fires, just sitting in streets. Speaking of which, we have a video of what has happened to a Tesla when Hurricane Ian went through Florida. And the problem that we had was that a lot of the owners of electric vehicles chose not to use them for evacuation because they didn't want to risk getting stuck on the roads where they couldn't get a charge. And so they left them. And what happened to them? They got invaded with salt water. And as a result of being invaded with salt water, they caught fire. Jim, let's take a look at that video. It is fascinating to watch, and it's got captions here. This apparently, they tried to drive it after it had gotten salt water in it, and of course, it's out on the main thoroughfare. The problem is that lithium and water don't mix. Even worse with salt water because it corrodes into the battery terminals and so forth. And they're trying to put it out with water, and they're only making it worse. I mean, to be fair, any car that gets flooded like that is going to have some problems. But most gasoline cars, I'm not aware of a single gasoline car in Florida, internal combustion engine car in Florida, that after the hurricane passed spontaneously combusted. I'm not aware of that. But dozens of electric vehicles did that. It's idiocy. It puts us in danger. It harms our electric power supply. And for me, look, I'm one guy, but for me, the most important factor mitigating against electric vehicles is they don't satisfy the way I travel or need. I did an analysis. There are something like 40 vehicles right now, electric vehicles that you can buy. If you want to buy them, you can buy them. And the government will be more than happy to give you a big subsidy if you do. It's coming from me. It's coming from Anthony. It's coming from Linnea, paying for you to buy your electric vehicle. Mostly pretty wealthy people buy these vehicles. So it's subsidy of welfare for the well-to-do. But there were only 2 vehicles being sold that I could get for sure to Houston and back. I mean, to Houston without a charge. That's if there's no traffic, if it's not too hot, if it's not too cold, you know, all the right Goldilocks conditions, then I could get to Houston. Other than that, every other vehicle, I'd have to stop for a charge. And you say, oh, well, you have to stop to gas yourself up. Yeah, that's right. No, I don't actually. I can go to Houston and halfway back without having to put gasoline in my current vehicle. But if I had to stop, it would take me like 5 to 10 minutes. If you wanted to charge an electric vehicle, the charging time at a fast charger, not your average charger that most of these are, but at a fast charger, if you can find it, is 30 minutes to an hour for a 20 to 80% charge. Right. On a trip like I took to Colorado, I would have lost my entire vacation traveling to and from Colorado, stopping to charge that vehicle rather than getting there overnight, coming back in one day, and having 5 beautiful days to enjoy my time with no charging. Yeah. Let's get back to the fire for a second. Linnea, you've had experience working on oil platforms associated with, you know, hard to put out fires. How would they put out a fire like this? Right. So it's the same with any fire having to do with electronics, and a lot of, you know, it's not just, it is mostly electric cars that have this problem now, but the more electronics you add to any car, the more of a risk you have of a fire that's difficult to put out because of the materials like lithium and stuff that go into them. So offshore,
if you get a fire in an electrical panel or any place that there is battery storage, anything like that, what they can do on the drill ships that I worked on is they can actually close off the room airtight and suffocate and pump CO2 into the room and suffocate the flame out. And then when they know that there's no spark chance or anything, they'll send someone in to get rid of the equipment that's causing a problem. But yeah, it's CO2. It's
so what you're saying is,
yeah, CO2. You know, you got to use CO2 to put out the savior of the planet for CO2.
Right. But I wanted to point out too, Sterling, with you talking about the range issue, there's a video that my dad sent me a while back from a YouTube channel that he enjoys. And actually this YouTube channel had a little bit of a controversy. The poor guy wasn't trying to get in the middle of any kind of political discussion, but he tried to take a Ford Lightning and do like a big towing project with it. And it just did not have the abilities that a normal pickup truck would have. And then he also went and tried to drive it around in the winter, and he ended up getting rid of it because the range was reduced by half in the winter because of the cold. Batteries don't operate very well in those kinds of temperatures. They also don't operate very well in high temperatures. Yeah. So there's a whole lot of issues, and it's not to say that the technology will never get there. Like if we have some random magic breakthrough in batteries, which they've been promising for decades, you know, who knows what could happen. So I don't want to dismiss the entire concept of an EV, but current EV technology can't be mandated because it's just not there.
Anyone who wants an electric vehicle should have the right to buy an electric vehicle. I got no problem with that. But I shouldn't be paying for their electric vehicle. I shouldn't be subsidizing that purchase because the government's decided these things are better when they are not. And, you know, you talk about Alaska. That's right. Alaska, there are cities in Alaska that try to replace their diesel bus fleet and their natural gas bus fleet, because they had some natural gas buses, with electric vehicles. They shut that project down. San Francisco tried electric buses. They pulled them off the road. It was either Connecticut or New Hampshire recently that the governor signed one day. He signed a bill saying we're transitioning our public fleet to all electric vehicles. And the very next day, the only city that had bought electric buses so far pulled its entire fleet off the road of 7 buses because one of them caught fire while it was sitting in a parking lot.
Yeah. It's just
government.
Speaking of catching fire, I want to get into a couple of videos to help our viewers get an understanding of just how volatile lithium and water together are, or even lithium and air. Well, we've got this one clip here of this battery fire of a laptop type battery. Okay, now he's basically puncturing the battery with a push pin from a bulletin board. Look at that. This is why they worry about these things on airplanes. Yeah. With that kind of volatility, I mean, it's like a blowtorch going off. Can you imagine that in a confined space of an airplane? And they had problems like this with batteries, lithium batteries on transport ships. There was a fire a couple of years ago of a ferry boat where they had some lithium battery cars on the ferry boat, and the ferry boat caught fire because the lithium battery caught fire while it was being transported. Now, we have another clip after this one that shows what happens when you put lithium, pure lithium metal, and water together. Now, you may remember in high school, you put sodium in water and it exploded. Well, lithium is twice as volatile as sodium when you put it into water. And not only that, it does something else that's very, very unique. Watch. It produces hydrogen gas. As you know from the Hindenburg, hydrogen is extremely flammable. And here it's what they do. They capture that hydrogen in a test tube, put it over that candle, and watch. Boom. So the lithium, when it reacts with water, it produces hydrogen gas and oxygen. It's a self-sustaining reaction. And this is why it's so explosive and so problematic. And so we have literally now hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of ticking time bombs out there on the road that if they get, in an accident or they get water incursion or anything, they're going to catch fire and burn up. And this is something that doesn't happen with gasoline or diesel vehicles. As Sterling pointed out, none of them spontaneously combusted during Hurricane Ian.
Well, but you said if anything happened. No, the problem is worse than that. It's nothing has to happen and they can still combust.
Yeah.
Just sitting there, the batteries can heat up when they're not being used, when they're not charging, they can catch fire. It happened in India with scooters. It's happened in the US. It's happened at battery backup power plants where the units were sitting there adding power to the grid, and all of a sudden, boom, fire breaks out. Now, I love the idea that you have to use carbon dioxide to put out these fires. I can see us some now the terrorist gets on the airplane with a cell phone, punctures it with a pin, sets off the fire, and they say, "Oh, we got to cut off the oxygen and pump in CO2." Everybody's dead, but the fire's out.
Yeah.
You know, it's
well, you know, that might be the
crazy.
next terrorist attack. That could very well be a terrorist
now that you
attack.
show me that, it's like, oh, I didn't realize it was that easy. That scares me. And, you know, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And government keeps plodding along saying we're going to force the replacement, you know, no new internal combustion engines after 2035. Right. And where's the power going to come from? What are we going to have to do to the grid? Where is all the materials going to come from? We are trading energy independence. We went from energy independence to energy dependence largely on OPEC for a while, under Trump to energy independence again. And now we're going to have energy dependence on China. That's a good trade-off.
Yeah, that's a problem. It really is. And, you know, I really worry about the idea that, you know, people take laptops and cell phones on airplanes all the time. I mean, what if the next terrorist coordinated attack for an airplane had to do with basically puncturing batteries on laptops? I mean, they are, you know, crazy. They don't care about dying. So they'll do anything to basically make that happen. And so, you know, it's just really a big concern. But you make a great point, Sterling, and that is we are going to be almost completely dependent on China to produce these things for the rare earth metals and everything else that goes into these electric cars. You know, we could be fully independent of any nation in producing gasoline-powered vehicles if we would just drill more and have our factories here in the United States producing these things, opposed to shipping them overseas. You know, basically what happened with the Environmental Protection Act, put together when Nixon formed the Environmental Protection Agency back around 1970 or 71, is that we've exported all of the pollution problems that we used to have in the United States, from smog and toxic gases and so forth and so on. We've exported that to China, and China doesn't care. They live in a soup of pollution over there. You've seen those pictures of Beijing. Linnea, you've seen, you know, what can happen here with these fires and so forth, and the energy density and so forth. What do you think about the reasoning beyond, you know, saving the planet in producing these electric vehicles? Is there any other sort of ulterior motive that you can think of for producing these things and pushing them on the American public?
Well, I mean, the World Economic Forum and a lot of environmentalists have said for decades that the environment would be much better off if we didn't travel as much or as far. There's something I've kind of heard whispers about. I haven't dug all that deep into it, so take it with a grain of salt. But I have heard that the UK is starting to experiment with the idea of kind of isolating people's travel to certain regions of their town. So like you can't go a certain distance away. And these would have to do with kind of a climate lockdown kind of idea where, you know, in order to reduce emissions from traffic, they would isolate your ability to move by tracking your vehicle or putting up physical barriers to a select, you know, necessary region of travel for you. So, but that's been an idea for a long time with these people. Basically, you know, there's kind of a, I don't want to use the word conspiracy theory because that is misused. Just because something is a theory about a conspiracy doesn't automatically make it false. But the Agenda 21 thing, for instance, for a long time, people were floating around this map of the like Wildlands project or whatever that they had proposed, which was basically that people would have specific regions that they were allowed to live and travel in. And then there were wildlife corridors all over the place that you weren't allowed to cross. Or human transportation corridors on major highways, and that's about it. And that your movement would be significantly limited. And I really do think that part, maybe not a majority part, but part of the reason why they push the EV thing so hard is because they're fully aware that your range is pretty significantly restrained by an electric vehicle. But they don't want people making cross-country road trips and stuff all the time. And they don't want people to fly either. No. So I really do think that part of the reason why this is the electric car thing in particular is so interesting to so many of the kind of Great Reset types is that it'll restrict movement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, another potential reason, I, as Linnea said, I don't have any data or evidence for this, but a certain president's son has made some good money off of China and connections to foreign powers who produce the minerals for this. And of course, if we become more dependent on them, money might flow to those coffers. In addition, you got to think about the Biden administration has said he wants to, because it's in the bills, he wants to increase mining. He wants to produce more of this here. He wants to refine more of this here. All that stands in the way of that is, well, every other environmental law that's been enacted in the last 50 years. Try to get a mine. He recently foreclosed a mine in Alaska that would produce minerals that would help his electric car revolution. So it seems that one hand doesn't know most of the time or doesn't understand most of the time, unless it's just some kind of conspiracy, what the other hand is doing. He says he wants more mining here. He says he wants more of this produced here. He doesn't want to rely on China. That's what he says. That's what Biden has repeatedly said. That's what his administration has said. And yet you will not get a single mine permitted in the next 10 years, my suspicion is, to produce rare earth minerals that are necessary for the things that they need for the 2035 transition. You won't get these parts made here. You won't get them refined here because Clean Air Act laws, NEPA regulations, all sorts of laws stand in the way. And every mine that is proposed is blocked, if not by the administration itself, by lawsuits that tie it up with environmental laws. So the plans that this administration says it has are fantasy land. And maybe we should be a little thankful for that because they're dangerous.
Yeah. You know, Linnea, you brought up an interesting point about restricting travel. You know, it's that may be, in fact, one of the goals. But there's another thing going on in Switzerland right now because they have power shortages, you know, because natural gas has been restricted and everything else. They are now making an edict where they are going to ban electric vehicles from driving on the road under certain power conditions where, you know, you can't get enough charge. So, I mean, that is really restricting people. You've got an electric car, you're walking the talk, and you know you're buying the indulgences for the climate cult, and yet you can't even drive your electric car. What the hell?
And this is in a country, by the way, that doesn't rely on fossil fuels for its electric power. It's something like 60% renewable, mostly hydropower. And 30%, it's basically 98% of their electric power comes from hydropower or nuclear. And yet they can't charge their vehicles. Yeah. And of course, we had the same experience in California, right? California passed the law that says you can't sell new internal combustion engine cars after 2035. And the day after that was signed, Governor Newsom comes out and pushes an emergency order saying, don't charge your electric vehicles during these times, and ships don't use the electricity from our ports to keep your engines running. Go ahead and go back to diesel. And then he had to sign environmental waivers to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I know it's absolutely crazy what's going on in California. On one hand, they're mandating you do this. On the other hand, they're not going to give you the power to actually drive your indulgence. But interestingly enough, they may switcheroo on some of that, where there are places where they do have enough power. They may create fake crises, so to speak, where, well, if you have an electric car, well, then you can travel because, you're not hurting the planet. Well, you other folks that are driving diesel and gas or whatever, coal burners or whatever you've got, no, 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 no. You can't travel because you're hurting the planet. That's the kind of mindset that's coming out of this. I think at this point, we could probably start opening up our discussion to some questions from some of our viewers. If you want to put them into the chat, type in a question and we can talk about it, maybe give you some answers and do a little discussion on it.
Before we do that, can we talk about the grid requirements for this transition?
Absolutely. Let's talk about grid.
Because look, it's not as if we have the capacity to charge the number of electric vehicles that they want today. If every internal combustion engine went away tomorrow and they were all replaced by electric vehicles, our electric grid would collapse. We don't have the power generating capacity. We don't have the excess capacity, and we don't have the transmission system to do that. Okay, so if you want a 2035 transition, we've got to build a lot more capacity, take up a lot more land because you're not going to build it with coal. You're going to use solar or wind. A lot more intermittency on the grid, which means you're going to have a problem charging those things when you want to. And I think, and I've said this before, I think the whole Green New Deal, which pushes for electrification of almost everything, get rid of natural gas grills and furnaces and everything else, go to all electric. I think that this is why they want open borders, because we're going to have to import a lot of labor to build all this stuff.
Yeah, that could be. The whole idea of electric vehicles, it sounds romantic, that they're not going to hurt the environment. And a lot of people just buy right into this because, they're accepting that romantic idea, that what I do with my life is not going to affect the planet. But there's a whole backstory associated with mining. If you look at some of the lithium mines, copper mines, and other things, and how environmentally destructive they are, can compare that to, an oil well. An oil well or a gas well takes up, a couple hundred square feet at most when it's in production, whereas a lithium mine can take up, square kilometers or square miles of land and make it permanently unusable. When an oil well is done or a gas well is done, you cap it, you put some concrete in it, and you pave it, you not pave it over, but you cover it over, and it's done. You didn't even know it was there. And that's the kind of problem that we're facing with this green revolution. We are creating massive holes all over the planet, like you see here in these photos. And they're never going to go away. They are a permanent scar on the landscape. And so people that are driving electric cars think they're not hurting the planet. Well, if you're getting your lithium or copper or other rare earth metal out of a pit mine like this, you are in fact contributing to hurting the planet.
You're talking about thousands of tons of earth having to be moved to produce a single pound of lithium. That's just the lithium. That's not the cobalt that's mined using child and slave labor in Congo. That's not the yttrium and other rare earth minerals that goes into these technologies that are also have to be mined, none of which is being done here in the United States. It's madness. It's damaging to the environment. It's tearing up natural wildlife habitat. Like you say, look, I have friends where I've hunted on their place that have both natural gas operations and oil jack pumps operating. Deer walk right around this. It doesn't disrupt their habitat, except during the construction phase they move out. As soon as that's over, it's right back in. Turkeys, deer, wildlife abound. I'm sorry, ain't even wildlife abounding in a lithium strip mine or in a cobalt mine. If when you're building all the turbines needed to charge these things across the land and the solar arrays built across the land, you're disrupting wildlife habitat. You're killing birds and bats and desert tortoises and all those things, you know, sage grouse. There was a great, I don't know if any of you watch Yellowstone, but it's a pretty good show. And this governor has a big, you know, the theory is this governor has a big ranch and he's the new governor. And one of his staff, his chief of staff says, okay, we're going to stop the natural gas production on state lands here. But we've approved a 27,000 acre solar panel facility on state land. And they were stopping it because of sage grouse habitat. And he says, won't that disrupt sage grouse habitat? And he says, no, there's no data supporting that. And he says, well, what will they do with the sagebrush that would be where the solar panels are? He goes, oh, they'll clear it out. He says, and you don't think that's going to disrupt sage grouse habitat? That's where sage grouse live. And you know, he fired him anyway. It's pretty good, but you know, that's the mentality of those folks. They argue that we shouldn't have offshore oil and gas because it'll disrupt right whales. I know, I've testified on this. Oh, it'll disrupt the North Atlantic right whales if we allow offshore drilling in the Atlantic. But then they want to put huge wind farms all the way from Maine to Florida and then up and down California's coast. You don't think that's going to disrupt the North Atlantic right whales? It's either blindness on their part, you know, hysterical blindness out of fear of climate change, or just sheer hypocrisy. As Linnea says, it might just be that they don't want us to have a viable electric grid.
Right.
But back to the Pleistocene is what they want.
Now, what are your thoughts on this, Linnea?
Well, first, you know, I've said it before, but I think that the hypocrisy thing, you know, while it's true, I think that it kind of covers up a little bit of the actual situation that's going on. And it's the same in politics at large right now. I don't think it's a hypocrisy issue. I think it's they are asserting a hierarchy. You know, they are saying, no, you cannot do this, but we can. For this project that we like, it's okay. It's not about, you know, we care so much about the environment or the whales or whatever it happens to be. It's that, yeah, they're going to be disturbed and we're going to make sure that it's our projects that do it, not yours. So I don't think it's hypocrisy. I think it's that they are choosing to prioritize their ends over ours and their favored industry fellas over ours. But also, I noticed in the comments that there's someone in there, Binky Brandt, who said that he works in the auto racing industry. And that's an interesting area right now with the regulations that have been going on, especially in the crackdowns on people doing, you know, modifications that either improve their performance on their vehicle or maybe skirt some EPA rules. That whole situation is incredible to me because these vehicles, I mean, they're making relatively minor changes, right, in terms of the grand scale, like, scheme of things. But the EPA has come down so hard, doing full-on raids on these little auto shops that do, you know, exhaust tampering and stuff. I
think it's called tuning. I think it's called tuning.
And he mentioned, Binky earlier mentioned that when they're trying to import parts for the auto racing industry, which isn't, you know, you're not driving these cars on the road, you know, downtown or anything. They're just taking them to the track. And he said that because of the regulations and some of the other, you know, supply chain issues, a ship of parts that before would have cost $4,000 to get over here is now costing $40,000 to get over here. And it's putting a lot of these people out of business. I really do think that the regulations on the auto industry, whether or not it's intentionally doing this, it's driving up the prices of regular combustion engine vehicles. It's also going to drive up the prices of electric vehicles because they depend on combustion engines to get their parts here, right? So I think that in the end, whether or not it's intentionally part of the goal, they are working on making it so that personal vehicles are incredibly difficult to have.
They are. And everything is going up. You know, Sterling, you mentioned a video from the TV series Yellowstone. Our producer Jim has got that queued up in the background. Let's watch that, because it's a really good clip that kind of, you know, encapsulates everything that we've been talking about here. Let's see if we can see that video. There it is. It's coming up now. And then he fired the guy.
And then he fired him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, that is the kind of mindset that a lot of the environmentalists have. They don't think through the whole process and the repercussions and the consequences of their actions. They only see the unicorn, the shining bright unicorn off in the distance that we've got to get to. That's the whole problem with a lot of the environmentalism today.
Or, Linnea may be 100% correct. They don't even see the shining unicorn. It's, we don't care how it affects you. It's gruel for you and caviar and lobster for us. Remember, the same week, the Biden administration's fishing council said we're going to do something. We got to do something about the Maine lobster, and Whole Foods said we're not going to sell Maine lobster to save lobster. Biden served a lobster meal to Maine lobster meal to the Prime Minister of Canada, right? For all those people, everyone had lobsters, multiple lobsters for each person. That's the lobster we got to protect, except when it's for us. It's one set of rules for us, another set of rules for the hoi polloi.
Yep, and that's been that way from, you know, time memorial, associated with people in power. You know, one set of rules for you, another set of rules for the rest of them. You know, it's like the whole let them eat cake mentality that's going on there. There was an interesting comment that was upstream that I want to get back to about recycling. And, you know, one of the other problems that is really not dealt with at all, whether it's solar, whether it's wind power, or whether it's batteries from EVs, there's no good recycling programs in place for any of this stuff. Solar panels have a useful life of about 25 years. After that, their efficiency starts really dropping, and they just don't have any really good, I mean, does anyone know anywhere where you can take a solar panel to get it recycled? I don't know of a single place. So there's either it's not possible or they just haven't thought it through. The same thing with EVs. You know, you've got a lithium battery, which we saw earlier in the program, catches fire when you expose it to air. How do you recycle such a thing safely? I mean,
well, you don't you don't do the solar panels either. The minerals are, you know, even in the silica, it's all built into it. They can't separate it out. I'm not sure they can physically separate it out, but they certainly can't do it cost effectively. And so these things are ended up in landfills. And that's if you assume they last 25 years before they start declining in power. I think there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case. Certainly those solar panels that were ripped off homes during the hurricanes didn't last 25 years. And then you look at the wind turbines. Look, you have to be licensed. You have to have a licensed landfill under certain conditions to accept wind turbines and solar panels because of the leakage problem from the toxic leakage. And many licensed landfills are turning these turbines away. Why? Well, you got a turbine that's over 200 feet tall. You have to, if they don't crush it up before they get it to you, and then there's the blades themselves, right? If they don't crush them up and cut them up before they get them to you, even if they do, it takes up a lot of space. You're not going to do it at your facility. It costs too much money. You know, they're starting to charge special rates just for that stuff. But some landfills are just saying, no, it's not even worth it with the special rate. We don't want them. We've got to keep this landfill open for the next 20 years. And we can't do that if we're dumping huge wind turbines and blades in there. So they've got a real problem as to what to do with these things at the end of the useful life, however long that may be.
Yep. You know, and I've had a lot of experience with the internal combustion engine. I mean, I work on them. I've rebuilt engines and so forth. And I got to tell you, you know, I've also seen vehicles taken to the junkyard. And it's so much easier to recycle a standard internal combustion engine vehicle and do it safely. I mean, all you do is you drain the fluids, and there's recycling programs in place for that, for the oil and for the radiator water and everything else. And you can take a vehicle to a scrapyard and they will strip it down They will take out the valuable pieces, you know, like the copper and so forth, sort those out, and then they melt down the rest of it and recycle it. You can't do that with an EV. You can't take an EV to a scrapyard and say, would you scrap this for me? They will turn it away because they don't want to take that giant claw and come down and grab it. The batteries will explode. It's insane. So all that's happening here in this race to save the planet from the dreaded carbon dioxide is we're creating a future environmental waste catastrophe. That's what's happening.
Let's talk about the waste in the oceans, right? So right now you have electric vehicles, both luxury and low-end electric vehicles, being shipped across the seas in container ships. Well, what happens when they catch fire in the hold? You can't put it out. The people abandon. This happened. I'm not making this up. This happened. They abandon the ship. The ship then sinks to the bottom of the ocean with all those expensive electric vehicles, but also all the metal and everything. That's got to be good for the environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that comment. We should put the old electric cars in Yucca Mountain because they can't use it for nuclear waste. Well, sure, that makes perfect sense. Why not? You know,
except Yucca Mountain can hold a lot of nuclear waste because it's compact. It's not going to hold a lot of electric.
That's true. That's true. You know, it's hilarious. And it's sad, too, because literally there is this future looming disposal problem that no one is dealing with. They're just rushing headlong into this, you know, green dream, chasing the unicorn without really thinking through what are we going to do in the future to dispose of all this stuff when it stops working. And that's the real problem looming in the future. All right, I think we should open up to some questions. If any of our viewers have questions that they would like to ask of us, put them in comments and we'll get to it. But while we're doing that, Linnea, you haven't had a chance to comment here in the last couple of minutes. What do you think about all of this with the disposal problem and so forth?
Well, I've done quite a bit of research into recycling the rare earth minerals issue. And a lot of people assert that it can be done, that you can recycle these materials. Well, it turns out that can is different than are doing it. And can is also different than can do it at an economic level. So there is a laboratory in Germany that came up with a process for extracting and taking apart all the different mineral components out of a smartphone. And everyone was really excited about it. But the downside of it is when you actually talk to the scientists who work there, they'll say, yeah, it works kind of, but we actually didn't get a very good percentage of these minerals out because when you contact Samsung and their manufacturing department and you say, hey, we need a list of all the minerals that are in here, because in order to formulate the right chemical processes in order to extract these different minerals that are used in the different components of the computer chips and everything, you need to know what they are first, because different metals will react to different compounds differently. So you contact Samsung and you say, hey, we need to know what this part is made out of. And they say, I don't know, ask the manufacturer who makes it for us. So then you go down the line to the manufacturer who makes it for them. And you say, hey, we need to know what all minerals make up this part. And they say, well, there's like 2 or 3 different companies that make up the different components that go into this part. So you'll have to contact them to figure out what all that is. And by the time you get down to it, nobody actually knows what the exact concentration or makeup is of any individual electronic item. So you can recycle things like the copper and the easy to identify stuff, but when it comes down to the smaller components of rare earth minerals and other parts that are typically mined as byproducts of mining something else, which is, you know, rare earth minerals are abundant in the Earth's crust, but they're spread out. So you can't, it's difficult to target mine for them, but you can mine for them as a byproduct of mining for gold or even coal, anything like that. So when it comes down to it, the economics of recycling out individual minerals from electronics, whether they're as small as a cell phone or something like an electric vehicle battery pack, it is more difficult than people will advertise. And that's because there are a lot of industrious fellas out there who are trying very hard in order to get a lot of government money to start their own recycling programs. There's very few that are trying to do it on their own dollar. It's all they want their losses covered by the taxpayer, basically.
Right.
So if that wasn't occurring, then I would have a lot more faith in the entire program. But turns out that it's a lot more difficult than people propose. You know, it's not like you can recycle cans or something and all you have to do is peel the logo off so that the ink doesn't destroy the smelter or anything. It's way different than that. So it's a whole new animal with this issue.
And
I'm going to make a prediction. Hold on a second, Sterling. I'm going to make a prediction that associated with electric cars and solar panels on your house, that in the not too distant future, and it will probably start in California, that because of the disposal problems with these things, someone like Newsom is going to come up with an idea that, well, now we have to charge you a disposal fee for your electric car, even if you're just trading it in or upgrading or whatever. They've got this already now for electronic screens, LCD screens and so forth. You pay an $8 fee in California for a screen over of about 32-inch in size, so that it can be recycled in the future at some point. I predict that we're going to see the same thing happening with solar panel installations on homes as well as electric cars. There's going to be a recycling recovery fee applied to these vehicles, and it's going to go up exponentially as the problem gets bigger and bigger. Okay, Sterling, you were going to say something.
Well, as an alternative, what they might do is what they propose doing with electronics is closing the loop. In other words, any company that manufactures these things has to take them back at the end of their useful life. It be responsible for the recycling themselves or the storage, rather than a fee. You just they have to take them back. They're responsible for the waste they've created by creating these technologies that we've demanded. You know, and getting to Linnea's point, my first thought when she talked about that German company contacting Samsung, I'm surprised Samsung was at all forthcoming, because I would have thought that they might say something like, sorry, our makeup is a proprietary formula and we don't want that disclosed to everybody so other people can come in and start making our phones.
Yeah.
Well, I think at a certain point, a computer chip is a computer chip. You know, there's only, it's the software that's going to be proprietary on something like a Samsung.
There's, there is recycling now for a lot of electronic components. That's fairly well established for computers and so forth. But, they do gold recovery on those and copper recovery, but they don't really recover a lot of the other things, such as the plastics don't get much recovery, and some of the other things that are in there. They do recover the metal from the cases and so forth for computers. But with a complex thing like an electric vehicle that's got all kinds of stuff in it, that's a real difficult recovery process, because it's not, it's so many different things on small levels, and there's a lot of disassembly required to safely, capture some of that stuff back. Okay, so we have a question from Ed Reed related to China. So what's China going to do about material supplies once we've become dependent upon them? What did Russia do with natural gas? Well, think about it. In California, after 2035, everything has to be electric. So what if China decides they want to shut down California's economy and they refuse to deal with, supplying the materials to produce those electric vehicles? And then, the mandate says, well, you can't own a vehicle unless it's electric, but you can't buy one, nor can you get the electric to power the thing because the grid still isn't working. I mean, what a utopian future.
We don't have to speculate on this, Anthony. It's already happened. I wrote about this about 10 or 12 years ago when I was writing on rare earth minerals. So back then, Japan and China had a standoff. China sent a fishing vessel into territorial waters that Japan claimed. China claimed it was their waters. And Japan's Navy seized the vessel. They said it was a spying vessel. It had all sorts of weird electronics and things that had nothing whatsoever to do with fishing. And China demanded their vessel back. Japan said, no, they were in our waters, and it's a spy vessel. It's not a fishing vessel. And China responded by cutting off the rare earth minerals that went to Sony and all the Japanese electronics manufacturers, their televisions, their cell phones and everything. The product dried up, and within a couple of weeks, Japan suddenly discovered, oh yeah, that really highly technical fishing vessel was just a fishing vessel, and it was in your waters, and we're sending it back. And the rare earths came back, but at a lower level than they were before, as a warning. This can happen again, and you ain't getting it from us at that price. They did the same thing to the world a couple of times, where they said, you know what? We want more manufacturing here in China. And so if you're going to start using our minerals to manufacture stuff in your countries, we're just going to keep our minerals off the market and force you to do the manufacturing here. They've already done it. It's not something we have to speculate about. We know what will happen if we become more dependent on them. They will take us down. We will no longer be able to build jets, fighters, because those screens rely on rare earth minerals produced or refined in China. Yeah. It's all sorts of things. And so the idea that we should become more dependent on China for this stuff than we already are is madness.
Right. So we haven't gotten a lot of comments with questions coming up. So I think I'm going to wrap up the show. We're getting up almost to an hour now. But before I go, I want to promote our climate conference, which is coming up on February 23rd through the 25th. Now, the ICC 15 is the climate conference for climate skeptics in the world. And I guarantee you, if you go to this conference, which is going to be in Orlando, Florida, it's going to open your eyes. There's going to be lots of new things you're going to learn there. You're going to come away enlightened, and you're going to have ammunition to be able to fight some of the environmental claims that are out there. I mean, we prepare people really well, where they come away with a tote bag full of all kinds of books and periodicals and sources and so forth. So I would encourage you to go register for this conference. Now, you can go to whatsupwiththat.com, WATTS, whatsupwiththat.com, and on the sidebar there's a place where you can click on it to register, or you can go to climateconference.heartland.org and register there. And right now, there's a promotion going on, early bird promotion, where you can get registered for less money. And I would encourage you to go do that. It's going to be really interesting this year in particular because of all the things that have happened associated with climate change and the Green New Deal and everything else. The true crisis, climate change or climate policy, is the theme of this conference, and I encourage you all to go take a look at it and register and come visit with us, where we'll have hands-on panels where you can ask questions, explore all kinds of different dimensions associated to the so-called climate crisis. All right, well, that pretty well completes our show for today. I want to thank you all for watching, and I want to thank you all for participating in chat and asking questions and so forth. For Sterling Burnett and Linnea Lueken, I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for the Heartland Institute. Good day.